There's a particular kind of thirst that changes a person, not the kind you feel after a long day's work, but the kind that makes your tongue swell, your vision blur, and your mind start bargaining with death itself. When you see someone in that condition, you have a choice to make. And that choice, more than any battle or treaty, reveals who you really are. Most of us like to think we'd do the right thing, that we'd choose mercy over fear, compassion over conformity. But the truth is, we don't really know until we're standing there, water bucket in hand, looking at someone our neighbors call enemy. What would you do? Would you risk everything you've built, every relationship you depend on, for a stranger who might not even survive? That's the question Thomas Garrett faced one August morning in 1873, and his answer would transform not just his own life, but the fragile peace of an entire region. Because sometimes the smallest acts of defiance against hatred become the greatest acts of courage. But let's go back to where it all began. 48 hours before dawn broke with unexpected visitors, the New Mexico sun was already merciless at 6 in the morning. When Thomas first saw the figure collapsed near his fence line at 34 years old, Thomas had spent the last 7 years working a hard-scrabble ranch somewhere between Fort Sumner and the Pecos River, and he'd learned to read trouble from a distance. Something about the way the body lay, partially hidden in sagebrush, sent a chill through him despite the rising heat. He set down the fence post he'd been carrying and walked closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The closer he got, the more details emerged. Duskin clothing, beadwork that caught the morning light, long black hair matted with dust and blood. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, unconscious and barely breathing. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her skin hot to the touch with fever. She'd been there for hours, maybe longer. Thomas looked around instinctively, scanning the empty horizon. No one else in sight, just him, this dying woman, and a choice he hadn't asked for, but couldn't avoid. He knew what he should do, according to the unwritten laws of his community. Leave her. Ride into town. Report it to the marshal. Let the authorities handle it. That was the safe choice, the one that wouldn't raise questions or eyebrows. Relations between settlers and the Mescalero Apache had been tense for years, with violence erupting unpredictably on both sides. Just last month, a ranch 30 miles south had been raided, livestock stolen, one man wounded. The territorial governor had issued stern warnings about harboring or aiding hostile Indians. The penalties were severe, and the social consequences even worse. Thomas had no family out here, no wife or children to consider, but he had neighbors he depended on for supplies, for help during hard times, for basic human connection in this isolated territory. Help this woman, and he'd become an outcast, maybe worse. But as he knelt beside her and saw her chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths, he thought about his own sister back in Kansas. Sarah had died of fever when he was 19, and he'd watched helplessly as she slipped away. This woman wasn't Sarah, wasn't even his own people, but she was someone's sister, someone's daughter, and she was dying of thirst less than 100 yards from his well. Thomas made his decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He scooped her up, surprised at how light she was, and carried her toward his small adobe house. She didn't wake, didn't stir, just hung limp in his arms as he navigated the uneven ground. Inside, he laid her on his own bed, the only one he had, and immediately began trying to get water into her. It was harder than he'd expected. She was too far gone to swallow properly, and he had to work slowly, patiently, letting tiny amounts of water trickle past her cracked lips while supporting her head. Hours passed this way. He alternated between water and cool cloths on her forehead, trying to bring down the fever that was clearly burning through her. By noon, she still hadn't regained consciousness, but her breathing had evened out slightly, and some color had returned to her face. Thomas sat back, exhausted, and only then began to think through what he'd actually done. He'd just made himself complicit in something his neighbors would view as betrayal. Word would get out. It always did in a territory this sparse. Someone would notice the extra activity at his place, or she'd be spotted, or she'd wake up and leave and tell her people, and then everyone would know that Thomas Garrett had sheltered an Apache woman. The consequences rolled through his mind like a dark flood. He'd be cut off from trading posts, refused service, maybe run out of the territory entirely. Some of the more hot-headed ranchers might do worse than shun him. But what was the alternative? Let her die when he had water and shelter. He'd seen men make that choice, had heard them justify it with talk of survival and practicality, and us versus them. He'd nodded along sometimes, staying quiet because disagreement was dangerous. But nodding along to words was different than standing by while someone died 50 feet from your front door. He couldn't do it, wouldn't do it, even if it cost him everything. She woke that evening as the sun was setting, and the first thing she did was reach for the knife that wasn't there. Thomas had found it on her belt and removed it, along with a small medicine pouch, setting both carefully on the table across the room. Her eyes, when they opened, were black and fierce and terrified. She tried to sit up, gasped in pain, and collapsed back onto the pillow. Thomas had been dozing in a chair nearby and jerked awake at the movement. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, both frozen by uncertainty and fear. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, trying to show he meant no harm. She said something in a language he didn't understand, her voice hoarse and cracking. He shook his head and pointed to the water pitcher on the bedside table. She looked at it, then back at him, clearly trying to determine if this was some kind of trap. He poured water into a tin cup and held it out, not moving closer, letting her decide. After what felt like an eternity, she reached for it with shaking hands and drank. She finished the entire cup, then another, and another. Finally, she spoke again, this time in heavily accented but clear English. "Where am I? How did I get here?" Thomas explained in simple terms. He'd found her near his fence line, brought her inside, given her water. He didn't know how she'd ended up there, or what had happened to her. He was still talking when she interrupted with a question that made his blood run cold. "Does anyone else know I am here?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but they will." She closed her eyes, and he saw fear flash across her face. "They will kill you if they find me here. The settlers, they will say you are helping the enemy." Thomas couldn't argue with that, because it was true. She continued, her voice getting stronger. "And my people will not understand either. They will think I have been captured, dishonored. This will make things worse, not better." He sat down heavily, the weight of the situation fully settling on him. "So what do we do?" She looked at him for a long time before answering. "You should have left me to die. It would have been simpler for everyone." Thomas felt anger flash through him, surprising in its intensity. "That's not a choice I could make." She almost smiled at that, though there was no humor in it. "Then you are either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both." Her name was Nasha, and over the next 2 days, as she slowly regained her strength, Thomas learned her story in fragments. She was the daughter of a prominent chief, out gathering medicinal plants with 2 other women when they'd been surprised by a group of territorial militia. The other women had been killed immediately. Nasha had run, taking a bullet that grazed her ribs and knocked her off her horse. She'd wandered for almost a full day before collapsing. The combination of blood loss, shock, and the brutal sun finally overwhelming her. She spoke matter-of-factly about these events, but Thomas could see the grief and rage simmering beneath the surface. She'd lost friends, nearly lost her own life, and now found herself dependent on the mercy of a stranger from the very people who'd attacked her. The irony and indignity of it weren't lost on either of them. Thomas knew time was running out. He hadn't been to town in 5 days, and people would start to notice. His nearest neighbor, a suspicious man named Cutler, had already ridden by once, ostensibly to borrow tools, but really to nose around. Thomas had met him at the fence line, handed over a hammer, and sent him on his way. But Cutler's eyes had been sharp and searching. Nasha needed to get back to her people, but she was still too weak to travel alone, and Thomas couldn't exactly escort an Apache woman across the territory without drawing attention. They were trapped in a situation with no good solutions, only degrees of bad ones. Stop for a moment. Thomas is at a crossroads we've all faced in different forms. If you were in his position, what would you do? Would you risk everything to help someone your own community considers an enemy? Or would you protect yourself and stay silent? I need to know, because here's the truth. Someone watching this right now is facing their own version of this choice. Maybe it's standing up for someone at work when everyone else stays quiet. Maybe it's choosing integrity when dishonesty would be easier. Maybe it's showing kindness when the world tells you to be hard. Your answer might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Comment below, "I would help because," or "I would protect myself because." There's no wrong answer here, only honest ones. And honest voices change lives. Now, let's see what Thomas decided. The decision was made for him on the 3rd morning when he looked out his window and saw dust rising from the south. Riders, multiple horses moving fast. He turned to Nasha, who was sitting at the table attempting to eat the cornbread he'd made. She saw his face and understood immediately. How many? He counted quickly. 6. Maybe 7. She stood, testing her strength, and he could see her calculating whether she could run. She couldn't. Not far enough. Not fast enough. Where can I hide? There was a small root cellar beneath the floorboards in the corner, barely big enough for stored vegetables and preserves. Definitely not designed as a hiding place, but it was all they had. He pulled up the boards and helped her down, noting how she gritted her teeth against the pain in her ribs. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." She nodded, and he replaced the boards, scattered a rag rug over them, and dragged his trunk on top for good measure. Then he walked outside to meet whoever was coming, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The riders resolved into 6 men he recognized, led by Marshal Davies from Fort Sumner. Davies was in his 50s, weathered and hard, the kind of man who saw the world in simple terms of law and order, with little room for gray areas. He pulled his horse to a stop a few feet from Thomas and sat there for a moment, studying him with cold blue eyes. "Thomas Garrett." The marshal's voice was flat, giving nothing away. "Marshal, what brings you out this way?" Davies dismounted slowly, and the other men followed suit. They fanned out slightly, not quite surrounding Thomas, but making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. "We're looking for an Apache woman, wounded, probably dying. She escaped after an altercation with a militia patrol 3 days ago." Thomas kept his face carefully neutral. "Haven't seen anyone. Been working my fence line mostly." Davies nodded slowly, then gestured to the other men. "Mind if we look around?" Thomas felt his stomach drop, but forced himself to shrug. "Free country. Help yourself." They searched the house thoroughly, methodically, going through every room, every trunk, every cabinet. Thomas watched from the doorway, appearing bored, but internally screaming. One of the men, a young deputy named Carson, stood on the rag rug right over the cellar entrance for what felt like hours, talking to Davies about tracking signs. Thomas could barely breathe. If Nasha made any sound, if the boards creaked wrong, if any of these men decided to move the trunk, it was over. But nothing happened. The search concluded with the men empty-handed and frustrated. Davies came back out, squinting in the bright sunlight. "You sure you haven't seen anything unusual? Any tracks? Any signs of someone passing through?" Thomas met his eyes steadily. "Nothing, Marshal. Like I said, I've been focused on my own work." Davies studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. But keep your eyes open, Garrett. This woman is dangerous. Her people have been raiding settlements, killing settlers. If you see any sign of her, you ride straight to town and report it. Understood?" Thomas nodded. Understood. The marshal and his men mounted up and rode away. But they didn't go far. Thomas watched them crest the ridge to the east and set up camp maybe half a mile away. They were watching his place, waiting to see if he'd make a move or if the woman would reveal herself. The trap had shifted, but not disappeared. Thomas waited until dark before pulling up the floorboards. Nasha climbed out stiffly, her face pale but determined. "They are still out there." He nodded. "About half a mile east. She will wait us out." She looked at him steadily. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. My people have killed your people, and your people have killed mine. Why risk everything for someone you have no reason to trust?" Thomas sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. "I don't have a good answer to that. Maybe I'm just tired of all the killing. Tired of pretending that every Apache is my enemy and every settler is innocent. You were dying. I had water. That's all it needed to be." She shook her head slowly. "It is never that simple. Your neighbors will destroy you for this." He looked up at her. "Maybe, but I'd destroy myself if I didn't do it. That's the part I can't explain. If I'd left you there, I could go on living my life, work in my ranch, getting along with everyone, but I'd know. Every day I'd wake up and know that I chose my own comfort over someone's life, that I was the kind of man who lets people die because helping them is inconvenient. I can't be that man. Won't be. Even if it costs me everything." They talked through the night, forming and discarding plans. Every option had fatal flaws. If Thomas tried to escort her back to her people, they'd both be exposed and likely killed by either settlers or Apache warriors who wouldn't understand the situation. If she tried to leave alone, she'd probably collapse before reaching safety, and the marshal's men would find her within hours. If they stayed here, eventually someone would discover her, and the consequences would be severe for both of them. They were circling the problem when Nasha asked a question that changed everything. "Do you know the name of the militia leader who attacked us?" Thomas shook his head. "Just that it was territorial militia, probably out of Santa Fe." "Why?" She leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. "Because it matters. That attack was not random. We were in territory guaranteed to us by treaty, gathering plants that grow nowhere else. Someone knew we would be there. Someone wanted us dead, specifically. My father has been negotiating with your territorial governor, trying to establish lasting peace. There are men on both sides who do not want that peace. Men who profit from the conflict, who gain power from the fear." Thomas felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. "You think someone set up that attack to sabotage the peace negotiations?" She nodded. "My father's rivals among our own people would be glad to see me killed. It would enrage him, make him abandon negotiation for war. And there are settlers who want the same thing, who see us only as obstacles to be removed. If I die here, especially if I die in a settler's house after being given shelter, the story could be twisted any number of ways. The truth is dangerous to powerful people, Thomas Garrett. That's why you are in danger too. He sat back, understanding now why the stakes were so much higher than he'd realized. This wasn't just about helping one person. This was about preventing a war that men on both sides were actively trying to start. The question was, what could one rancher and one chief's daughter do about it? The answer came at dawn when they saw the dust again. But this time, from the north, Thomas climbed to his roof and counted 15 Apache warriors moving fast and direct. They weren't raiding or scouting. They were coming here. And they were coming for Nasha. The marshal's men had seen them too and were mounting up, forming a line between the approaching warriors and Thomas's ranch. In less than 10 minutes, there would be a battle fought over his land between two groups who both thought they were doing the right thing, unless someone stopped it. Nasha was beside him now, her face grim. That is my father in the lead. She pointed to a tall warrior on a black horse. He tracked me here somehow. He knows I am alive, and he is coming for me. Thomas looked at the marshal's men, outnumbered but well-armed and determined. He looked at the Apache warriors, fierce and righteous in their mission. He thought about all the ways this could end badly, all the blood that would soak into his land because he'd made the choice to give water to a dying woman. And then he climbed down from the roof, walked to his well, and started hauling up bucket after bucket of water. Nasha stared at him. "What are you doing?" He kept working, his movement steady despite the approaching storm. "The only thing I can do. I'm going to walk out there and offer water to both sides." She grabbed his arm. "They will kill you. You will be caught between two groups who hate each other, and they will kill you without even thinking about it." He looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her release his arm. "Maybe, but I gave you water without asking who you were or which side you belonged to. Maybe that's what's missing from all of this. Someone willing to stand in the middle and insist that before we're Apache or settlers, before we're enemies or allies, we're all just people who need water to survive. It's not much. It won't solve everything, but it's what I have to offer." He filled 2 large buckets and walked out to the space between the marshal's line and the approaching warriors, right in the open where everyone could see him. He set the buckets down and stood there, arms at his sides, waiting. Both groups stopped, confused by this bizarre development. The marshal spurred his horse forward a few paces. "Garrett, what in the hell are you doing? Get back inside." Thomas shook his head. "There's been enough killing, Marshal. These men are looking for someone. I think we should talk before we start shooting." The Apache warriors had stopped about 50 yards away, and Thomas could see the leader, Nasha's father, watching him intently. Nasha appeared in the doorway of the house, and a ripple went through both groups. She walked slowly, painfully, across the distance to stand beside Thomas. She spoke in her own language, her voice carrying clearly in the desert air. Then she switched to English so everyone could understand. "This man found me dying of thirst. He gave me water. He sheltered me, even though it put him in danger from his own people. He asked nothing. He expected nothing. He simply saw someone who needed help, and he helped. Now you all come here ready to kill each other over me, over treaties, over land, over old grievances. But before any of you do that, I ask you to consider what this man has shown me, that it is possible to choose mercy over vengeance, humanity over hatred, that maybe, just maybe, we don't have to be enemies." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Thomas could see the calculations happening on every face. Marshal Davies looked furious and uncertain, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage his authority. The Apache warriors looked to their chief, waiting for his command, and Nasha's father sat on his horse, studying Thomas with eyes that had seen more death and suffering than Thomas could imagine. Finally, the chief dismounted and walked forward, slowly. The marshal's men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Thomas felt his heart hammering but held still. The chief stopped a few feet away and spoke in careful English. "You gave water to my daughter when you could have left her to die. You gave water without asking questions about tribe or treaty or whose side she was on." He paused, then continued, "This is what our people did once, before the wars. We gave water to travelers regardless of who they were, because water is life and life is sacred. We have forgotten this, all of us." He turned to look at the marshal and his men. "Your man here remembered what we all forgot." Marshal Davies urged his horse forward, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. "Chief Taklisham, this woman is wanted in connection with violence against settlers. I have a duty to bring her in for questioning." The chief's expression hardened. "My daughter is guilty of nothing except being in the wrong place when your militia attacked without cause." She and her companions were in treaty land, gathering plants, threatening no one. "Your men killed 2 innocent women and tried to kill my daughter. We could speak of duty and law, Marshal, but I think we both know the law has been broken by many people in many ways. The question now is what we do next. Do we add more blood to what has already been spilled, or do we try something different?" Thomas found his voice, surprising himself. "The marshal's men are camped on my land. The chief's warriors are on my land. Nasha is standing on my land. This is technically neutral ground at the moment. Maybe we could use it that way. Use it to talk instead of fight." Davies shook his head. "I don't have the authority to negotiate treaties, Garrett." "Neither do you," Thomas nodded. "I know, but you have the authority to not start a battle today, and the chief has the same authority on his side. What if we all agreed to stand down? Let Nasha go back with her father and take the truth about that militia attack back to people who can actually do something about it. What if we chose not to make this worse?" The standoff held for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Davies sighed and holstered his weapon. "I'm going to regret this, but all right. No bloodshed today." He pointed at Thomas. "But you and I are going to have a long conversation about this back in town, Garrett. You've put yourself in a hell of a complicated position." Thomas nodded. "I understand, Marshal." The chief spoke again, this time addressing his warriors in Apache. They lowered their weapons, but didn't retreat. He turned back to Thomas. "My daughter will come with me now, but I will not forget what you did. In our tradition, when someone saves the life of another, a debt is created, a bond. You are no longer a stranger to our people, Thomas Garrett. You are someone who chose honor when it would have been easier to choose fear. That matters. That will be remembered." Nasha touched Thomas's arm briefly. "Thank you, not just for the water, for seeing me as a person first." She turned and walked toward her father, her back straight, despite the pain. The Apache warriors formed up around her protectively, and the group began to withdraw. The marshal's men watched them go, tension slowly draining from the scene. Davies dismounted and walked over to Thomas. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. I honestly can't decide which." Thomas watched the warriors disappear over the ridge. "Maybe I'm just tired of watching people die when a bucket of water could have saved them." Davies shook his head slowly. "The territorial governor is going to hear about this. There will be questions. probably an investigation. You've made yourself a lot of trouble. Thomas turned to look at the marshal. But nobody died today. That's worth some trouble. The consequences came fast and hard. Within a week, Thomas was summoned to Santa Fe to explain his actions to a territorial commission. He told the truth plainly and without apology. He'd found a dying woman and given her water. He'd refused to let her die when he had the means to save her. He'd prevented a battle that would have cost lives on both sides. The commission was divided. Some wanted him charged with aiding hostiles. Others pointed out that technically he'd prevented a violent confrontation and potentially saved the lives of territorial militia. The legal arguments went in circles for days. But while the lawyers argued, something else was happening. Settlers who'd heard the story, not the political version but the human version, started coming forward. Some to condemn Thomas, true, but others to quietly express support, to say they were tired of the cycle of violence, that maybe there was another way. And from the Apache side, Chief Taklishim sent word through official channels that he was willing to return to peace negotiations, with one condition: that the territorial governor investigate the militia attack that had nearly killed his daughter and hold accountable those responsible. The investigation revealed what Nasha had suspected. The attack had been orchestrated by a group of land speculators who wanted the treaty lands opened for mining. They'd bribed the militia leader and fed false intelligence about Apache raiding parties to justify the attack. When the truth came out, there was a scandal that reached all the way to Washington. The men responsible were arrested. The peace negotiations resumed with new terms that included protections for both sides. And Thomas Garrett became an unlikely symbol of something the territory desperately needed: the possibility that individuals could choose differently, that the old cycles didn't have to continue, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was offer water to someone dying of thirst without asking which side they were on first. If stories like this move you, if they make you think about courage and choices in your own life, this channel is exactly for you. Click the subscribe button to join a community that believes character matters more than comfort. We share a new story every week that will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you what true strength looks like. There are hundreds of other stories like this waiting for you. Tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary moral tests on the frontier. Subscribe so you don't miss any. Each story is carefully crafted, not just to entertain, but to make you think about your own values and choices. That's our promise to you. Thomas Garrett had given water without asking questions. In return, he found something he hadn't even known he was searching for: a way to live with honor in a land divided by fear and hatred, a bridge between worlds that had seemed forever separated. The courage to choose what was right instead of what was easy. The choice had been simple, the consequences difficult, but he would make the same choice again if asked. That was enough. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and choices shape destinies in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider donating through Super Chat to help us keep bringing more stories like this. Your support means the world to us.